Hi, everyone. I'm Tara Savirajan. I'm a research professor here at NICO, and I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers today. Our first one is Emilio Leyuk. He's in the sociology department, and his advisors are Charles Kamick and Wendy Espeland. He's going to be talking to us today about who is afraid of data. And his research interests are more broadly on the social foundations of a data-driven society. And a fun fact about Emilio is he's starting a blog about his work. So hopefully you can catch that and follow his work through time. So thank you, Emilio. Take it away.
Thank you. This is working. Yes. Well, hi everyone. Well, first of all, this is normally I tend to have class at this time. I actually have class at 1, so I do have to leave a little bit earlier. But I feel always very bad when I present somewhere where like I haven't been a participant. That's not good manners. But so I apologize for that. But I'm really excited to present. So he's not here, but thank you to Adam for suggesting I present here, and thank you to Andy, Emily, Alana for coordinating. And so, what I sent is the abstract for a paper I published last year, but instead I'm going to present more broadly kind of like how that fits in my research interests and, what I'm working right now. As Tara said, I work broadly on the social foundations for a data-driven society. So, my work is way less fancy than most people here, but, I think I speak to like the kind of like social aspects of data. So my dissertation is about the economic dynamics behind the rise of machine learning. I've also done some work on privacy and algorithmic fairness, and this is what this is about. And again, because I have to leave a little bit early, I'm going to try to be short and leave space for questions right now. But mostly what I would be interested in is if like any of you have ideas on like, if any of what I present sparks ideas in you, or like some of you would be interested in collaborating or something, that would be my goal for today. Okay. Okay. So, what do I mean by social foundations of data and so on? And, probably all of you have heard both about the Snowden affair and the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So the Snowden affair on the right, in 2013, all the scandal about like the NSA kind of like collecting information on Americans and Europeans and and so forth, and then Snowden like was declared like public enemy and stuff like that. So I think that's an event that kind of like creates distrust of data, in this case for like privacy issues, and kind of like reduces the social acceptance of like data broadly speaking. And then 2015, 2016, the Cambridge Analytica scandal on the left. Okay, so on your right side. This is the Netflix documentary. I don't know if you have seen it, but like this is the degree to which like this kind of like has reached broad diffusion. And you can see where it's circled. As they took your data, they took control, and then they took control. So again, like this emphasizes kind of like I think like a growing fear about data. It's going like people now sometimes think like, oh, it's creepy that like this recommender system works as well or something like that. And that's kind of like what I want to work on. And this has all sorts of like repercussions. So for example, in the case of both the Snowden affair and the Cambridge Analytica scandal, it sparked, like a press scandal, but then also, mobilization around that. And that this is this article that I published with a co-author at Cornell. And then, ensuing regulation. So for example, this is part of the background for the GDPR in Europe. And, that poses all sorts of like consequences for solving problems and, enhancing processes with data. And as a kind of, I think, as a reaction to these, public and scandalous events, we see two things. Well, first, in this slide, we see the increasing regulatory attention on data. So these are just the number of congressional records for each of these 4 topics over time. So this is not a perfect measure of broader regulatory attention, nor a perfect measure of congressional attention. Some records just like mention artificial intelligence, others the full record is in artificial intelligence and so on. But this is a rough measure of congressional attention over time on artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, and big data. These are just common terms. I also search for data mining, algorithms, predictive analytics, all sorts of stuff. I think these 4 kind of like capture the core dynamic, which is that Congress was not super interested in data stuff, but starting in the mid 2010s, with Snowden, Cambridge Analytica, and so on, we see increasing regulatory attention. So, for data analytics, big data since about 2015, for artificial intelligence and machine learning since about 2018. But, Congress is paying more attention. But also, if you see on the y-axis, the number of congressional records in any case is not huge. So, like, I don't remember right now, but if you compare this with like abortion, immigration, debt ceiling, and stuff like that, like there's less attention, but it's growing over time. And, some of this is good, obviously, but it could also pose problems to how we can, as a society, solve problems with data. So this is kind of like one of the consequences of the increasing like salience of data, but then it's also about, kind of like social acceptance more broadly. And so this comes from the Pew Research Center's American Trends panel. It's a panel that has been going for a while. This is Wave 49, which was filmed in 2019. And they ask, people that are representative of non-institutionalized American adults to tell them how they felt about the risk versus the benefits of companies and the government collecting data about them. And the results are striking. So if you see on the top graph for companies, about 80, a little bit over 80% of Americans feel like the risk of data collection by companies outweigh the benefits. That's crazy. And same for the government, a little bit less. About 65% of people believe that the risk of data collection by the government outweighs the benefits. And so, if you think that like data does provide benefit, this is, as I do, this is kind of concerning. And, I guess, side note, I also thought the difference between companies and the government is striking. Supposedly Americans are like wary of the government and super pro-market. And so this is kind of surprising. Interestingly, I don't have the graph here, but it doesn't seem like it's because people believe that they're getting a bunch of benefits from the government and less benefit from companies. It's more because people believe companies pose more risks, even if people think they can benefit a little bit more, not a bunch, but they can benefit a little bit more from data collection by companies, but they think it poses more risk. So like this is what poses this. And I guess this is also like inside note, but obviously like this is just kind of like a little graph, like nothing causal or anything, but I think part of what might be going on behind this, and that'll be something I would like to like do a survey experiment to like start teasing out or something, is that the kind of like risks of data collection are more salient than the benefits of data collection. So if you see Netflix and you see The Great Hack, you're like, dang, this is wild. But you don't see like the benefits of like data in a lot of the cases. So, this is the background, increasing kind of like salience of data, maybe decreasing like social acceptance, increasing regulatory attention, and, maybe also politicization. So like, the computing industry has enjoyed, broad bipartisan support in the US for a while, but maybe that is also breaking. And so, for example, there's some data that suggests that since like 2016, Democrats are more likely to pass regulation, at least at the state level, on data stuff than Republicans. And so this is the context where the paper I kind of like sent fits in. And so the paper was particularly about who thinks predictive automation is fair or unfair. And again, I use the American Trends panel, but a different wave. I think the number is 35, which was fielded in the middle of 2018. And the cool thing of this data is that it measures 4 use cases of predictive automation: in credit, criminal risk, interview videos, and resume. So for context, this is just kind of like little vignette questions that they ask participants. Again, this is representative of non-institutionalized American adults. And they ask stuff like, oh, companies are developing this new computer program that can, use recordings of interviews to assess the candidates match with successful employees of the company. How fair do you think this program would be to job applicants? Or companies are developing a new finance score similar to a credit score that then they can use in kind of like helping decisions about credit. How fair do you think this would be for people? So questions like that in these 4 scenarios. So I think the cool thing is that it can see if you can see if there's variation across use cases, or if it seems to be more like an overall trend. And there is variation, I'll tell you the conclusion in a second. There is some variation, but there's also a common trend, which is what I'm going to highlight. And I analyzed this data with a couple of different predictive models. The one that I ended up selecting where lasso regressions that I use with all the available predictors in the data, which include kind of like three sorts of predictors. So demographics, so like gender, age, racial identity, stuff like that, where you are, like state and stuff like that. Perceptions about technology and social media. So these are kind of like attitudes measures, such as do you feel like tech companies should be more regulated, or do you think that the benefits that you derive from tech companies outweigh the costs, or do you feel like tech companies do a good job at measuring their impact, stuff like that. And then about social media. So these are measures such as how acceptable do you think it is for like social media to use your data to recommend you friends, or how acceptable do you feel it is for social media to use your data for targeting advertising or political ads and stuff like that. And then lastly, political views, Republican, Democrat, independent, or like conservative, liberal, moderate. And so the kind of like, I have graphs in the appendix if you want, but this is the main takeaway, which is kind of like there seems to be like a division, which I think is growing, but this data is just one point in time. There is a division, and certain people are more likely to think that predictive automation across these 4 use cases is fair, and other people are more likely to believe that predictive automation across these 4 use cases is unfair. And so the people that are likely to believe that predictive automation is fair tend to be more conservative, versus the people that tend to believe that predictive automation is unfair tend to be more liberal. On the kind of like fair side, not only are they more likely to be conservatives, but also their kind of like views about predictive automation align with their political views, conservative, and with their views about technology and social media. So they're more likely to believe that tech companies have good impact. They're more likely to believe that tech companies should be less regulated and stuff like that. And then they're also more likely to think that it's acceptable for social media. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Age. So age, for the most part, age was not one of the most important predictors picked up by the models. So yeah, and for example, there's other interesting kind of like little findings like that. Race. I don't remember the details right now. Like I have the graphs, but race was picked up by the models for one of the 4 use cases for credit, which is surprising because you would expect, for example, race to be important in criminal risk, where there has been, for example, all sorts of like debate about the Compass pretrial risk assessment tools and stuff like that. But it doesn't seem like race is one of the most important predictors. It doesn't mean like that there could not be an effect. It just doesn't seem to be where you're like getting more predictive traction. I mean, it could be possible. I cannot speculate as to like what could be going on in respondents' mind when they answered like, those questions. But I guess, yeah. Yeah, no, that's also possible too. So on the fair side, people that tend to be more conservative tend to kind of like be more pro like big tech, and also accept more like controversial social media practices like targeted advertising, or like experimenting with sentiments that other like Facebook scandal and so on. And on the unfair side, people that tend to be more liberal, anti big tech, and then also kind of like more rejectant of like controversial social media practices. I think this is important, because I think like this kind of like common pattern across 4 use cases speaks to a broader kind of like politicization of technology, in the context of polarization in the US. And I think that's important. I don't want to suggest that broadly, because at the beginning I was speaking kind of like broadly about data, so I don't want to suggest that broadly. Yeah, sorry, 1 second. I want to suggest that broadly, liberals don't like data and conservatives do like data, because I think with other questions you can like get different findings. So for example, I'm starting to explore like these kind of like 2 variables with like political affiliation and so on, and it seems to be the opposite. So I think like it's an issue that is politicized, but maybe there's not like clear lines like for other issues like abortion and so on. But yeah, go ahead. No, go.
I was wondering if the political affiliation was correlated with age, and then also potentially education level, because maybe They're just people who don't understand what predictive automation is.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Education was among like a couple of like measures of education did come up in like the important predictors, but not the most important. And to clarify, all these questions are really important. And I think like some studies are starting to tease them out, and I want to keep doing research on this. But my objective with this particular paper was kind of like more exploratory, because it's an area where we have like studies that focus on a couple of independent variables to see their effect on the dependent variable and stuff like that. But then also a lot of like non-representative samples, convenient samples of students and stuff like that. So I wanted to like take advantage of this national representative sample, and with more predictors to see like, okay, what seems to be important. And then we'd have to think like, okay, why is this important? What is the relation between this predictor and the outcome and so on. But my aim was not so much being like, okay, this is the particular kind of like functional relation or anything, but more broadly, these are the kind of like predictors that we should be kind of like keep doing research on. So yeah, again, I don't want to like super generalize this, but I do think this speaks to kind of like this growing politicization. And so that's it for me. I wanted to like close early in case you have like other questions or ideas, suggestions. That'd be great for me. And yeah, thank you very much.
I do have one question from the online audience. Does the opinion research data address differential accountability among government data collection versus corporate data collection?
What do the person online means by differential accountability? Okay, well, I'm not sure what the differential accountability, but like the question was literally, do you think that the potential benefits of these outweigh the potential risk of like the government or companies collecting data about you? So it doesn't like really kind of like get into like other issues. So like, maybe the degree to which like you can hold companies versus the government accountable impacted how respondents thought about it. Like I cannot say. And then, there's all sorts of other stuff like this probably varies by party lines. This probably varies by like states and stuff like that. Yeah, no, that's a good question. And that's exactly the reason why I went for machine learning. Again, because I did not have strong hypothesis, and like the field is still kind of like figuring this stuff out. So I didn't have strong hypothesis about like what should impact what, or like how should be that impact happening. And so like, I don't have like enough knowledge to like really specify a good model on that. So I was more like, kitchen sink, let's see what seems to be important. And then from those things that seem to be important, let's kind of like, over time, keep exploring like what are the relations is like. So I wanted a more inductive approach that kind of like these models enabled for me to like not have to like, derive on like kind of like rely so much on like, common sense, because there's not really like strong insights in the literature to specify a good model.
Thank you, Emilio. Great talk. If you have any more questions, be sure to send him an email. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Abby Smith. So Abby is in the Department of Statistics. Her advisor is Bruce Spencer, and her talk will be about the impact of entity resolution on observed network structure. Her research interests more broadly are on data science for social impact. And two very interesting facts about Abby: she's been to all 50 states before and did competitive jump rope for 12 years. So welcome, Abby.
Hello, that's good. Hi, everyone. I'm Abby. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about how an important data cleaning step actually is impacting your social network analysis. Oh, sorry. Is there a way to do this? Okay, hold on. Is there? There we go. There we go. Yeah, you're good. Yeah. Okay, there we go. So this is just broad outline of some of the concepts that I work with. And I'm just going to be giving some brief definitions of each one. So entity resolution sounds really intense and scary, but it just basically means the removing and resolving of duplicate entries in a data set. And I particularly look at this with a social network data set, multiple of them actually. And then network metrics are numeric descriptors of the network. They can tell us things like how closely connected our network community is, things like degree and centrality. And then evaluation measures, things like precision, recall, F measure. Those typically tell us how well our entity resolution algorithm is doing at removing and resolving those duplicate entries. Now you see the terms unsupervised and supervised up here, and you might have seen those probably in like a statistical learning setting. And I'm just using those to mean when we do and do not have ground truth data, meaning we know what are the true duplicates and true underlying entities in our data set. If we know that, that's supervised, or even if we know that partially, that's supervised. Otherwise, I'm calling it unsupervised. And I'm going to talk about some tools we maybe can use when we don't have that information. So I have the privilege of working with some really awesome collaborators, and so I kind of have two motivating network data sets. So one of them is a study that was conducted by the University of Kentucky on a population of rural people who use drugs in Appalachia, primarily opioids. And then I also work with a group out of Feinberg here on the largest and most diverse longitudinal study of gay men in the city of Chicago. And these are different than a lot of networks being used in social network analysis. They're not Facebook, they're not Twitter, they're not LinkedIn, and they're also not co-authorship networks. These are real people, it's sensitive populations. And the way that these studies were conducted is they had study participants or egos come in and name drug use, social support, or sexual partnership ties. And these people are alters. And there's not really a public roster of gay men in Chicago or people who use drugs in Appalachia. So they're relying on people to free list these demographic pieces of information. So just asking people, can you give me the names? Can you give me the age, gender of these network ties? So you end up having something like this picture on the left. Maybe the study participants or egos were A and B, and they name C as a network tie. But ideally, right, the researchers want to get to more of this type of picture. They want to understand, what is my full observed social network community? And so there's a class of statistical algorithms called entity resolution to help us do this. And to just convince you that this is an important thing to do, here we have a picture of the egocentric networks collected in Care to Hope. And with one pass of entity resolution, we get a picture like this on the right. So as you can see, a completely different picture of the network community. People are a lot more connected. There's a giant connected component, in fact. And we see this. Radar is a larger study than Care to Hope. And we see that here. But again, egocentric networks. And here, everything that's in pink is actually part of one giant connected component, and that's over 80% of the network with just one pass of entity resolution. But this process isn't always that clear. So here's an example of how the data looks like upon collection, right? So we have egos, Addie, Brian, and Tanya, and then they name their network ties, their alters, Bob, Brian, and Addie. And so we can kind of have just here 3 examples of what our network could look like after entity resolution. The algorithm could choose to keep everything as is. We could choose to consolidate ego Brian and alter Brian, or we could choose to consolidate both ego and alter Brian and ego and alter Addie. And like I said, this is just, these decisions though can be made using a statistical algorithm to like guide us. So I focused, my thesis work has focused primarily on two of these. One is Felighi Center, which is probably the oldest entity resolution tool. It also is known as record linkage a lot of times, if you've heard that term, a very similar task. Entity resolution is looking within one data set primarily, and record linkage is usually merging multiple in the absence of a unique identifier. Anyway, so Felighi Center has a lot of implementations already in R and Python, and primarily focuses on attributes. So really just looking at similarity of name, age, and gender. But it does suffer from some unrealistic assumptions. One of these, for example, is something called transitive closure. So Felighi Center, if record A matches record B, and record B matches record C, it would make sense that record A and C also are a match, but this is not enforced in this way in Felighi Center. So Bhattacharya-Gator handles this by not looking at things in terms of like pairs with match and non-match status, but instead of that, looking at clusters. So it's a hierarchical clustering algorithm, more computationally expensive, harder to implement, but typically performs a little bit better. So I'm going to be talking about primarily Felighi Center, but know that my thesis work also focused on this other one. And generally the process of how this works is we have a data set. You a lot of times have, especially with larger data sets, a lot of pairs, right? If we think we have n rows, that's a lot of pairs. And so we can do something called blocking, which is essentially before we even do anything else and consider a pair as a match, we require it to meet a logical condition. So we require a pair to match on first initial of the first name or age or something like that, just to reduce our comparison space. And then we do similarity calculation. We then classify match or non-match, and then we see how well we did afterwards. And my work focuses kind of on how small decisions in these algorithms can actually have large impacts downstream for the network. And so I focus on two different tuning parameters. One is in this kind of similarity phase, and the other that's in the classification phase. And again, just to hammer this point home, this is how the data would look, right? From the previous example. And as you can see, you ideally would want to compare IDs 1 and 5 and IDs 3 and 4 here. And T is controlling how strict we are with the criteria of like, is this pair a match or a non-match? So higher T means that you're being more strict. Lower T is you're being less strict with how similar these rows have to be, pretty much. But one important thing that I forgot to mention from before with the difference in the two algorithms is we have a rich untapped data source here because we have relational information as well, right? We have information about who people are connected to in the network. And this is something that Bhattacharya and Gator, the newer clustering algorithm takes care of, but not necessarily the older tool. And here's why it's a good idea. So here's an example of two people that look similar, right? They have similar names, but name none of the same people that they're connected to, right? So this is an example of negative evidence for a match. And here's an example of positive evidence, right? So two people with similar names and they share a network tie. So this is something that we'll probably want to take into account when we do entity resolution. And this alpha parameter controls how much we want to take into account, just like pure similarity of like the name strings, age, gender, all that. And with how much we want to really emphasize, okay, well, do they have shared relationships in the network? So this is something that I looked at. So hopefully by now I've convinced you that entity resolution is important for network analysis and is an imperfect process. This has been studied in the co-authorship network space. Authors publish under different names. And so that this has been a large thing of like, can we really assess author productivity if we don't have like reliable underlying collected network data? But my work in my thesis tries to show that this is important for this particular type of collected data. Particularly, you're trying to assess who the most influential people are for an intervention for things like HIV and all of that. You need a good, accurate picture of the observed social network community. But I also try to provide the network analyst with some tools that can adjust for the fact that it is an imperfect process, and sometimes we do have limited information. So Again, really love working with my collaborators, and I love playing statistical consultant. That's been a cool part of my work. And so these researchers came to me and they're like, okay, Abby, like right now, the way we do entity resolution is we literally have our community-based interviewers go through, this is for Care to Hope, they go through and just look at literally every single potential matching record and we've constructed the network just based on their judgment. Obviously, we want to move towards something more automated. And Radar already has tried to implement something more automated. And so how do we know what tuning parameter to pick if what we care about is this underlying network structure? Yeah. Yeah. I didn't put that in the slide or the slides, but so go ahead. Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. And that's what in my future work, it's like, I could totally do a whole nother thesis on like that's a different decision too. That's important as well. So yeah, so what do we pick, right? And I did basically how I looked at this, right, is I like looked at a range of different thresholds. I looked at a range of different alphas for the 2 different algorithms for the 2 different data sets, looked at the resulting networks, computed network metrics. And with Care to Hope, I do have access to some underlying match status. I mentioned that the community-based interviewers went through and they said, this is a match, this is a non-match. And for Radar, I only had a subset of that, and I'll talk about that in the next a couple slides from now, but I compared it to ground truth, made some interesting observations, but I'm just gonna talk about one of them. Lightning talk. Oh, here are the global network metrics I looked at. So a lot of things people are probably familiar with degree, density. This is homophily. So how do people with higher degree, like more connections, typically connect with people of higher connections, or do they typically connect with people of fewer connections? Average shortest path length, things like that. And one interesting observation, oh, you can't see the top. The one interesting observation is this assumption of transitive closure really changes the downstream network. And this is something that's not reported at all in egocentric network literature. If people do entity resolution, they definitely, we're lucky if they talk about how they did that, but couldn't find any papers where people talked about if this was an assumption that they enforced after. And as you can see, this changes, this is degree assortativity. So the graphs are slightly mislabeled. The one on the left is without transitive closure, one on the right is with transitive closure. And we have this ground truth data set for Care to Hope. And you can see that while we see more variability without transitive closure, but we also, this is an important thing, is that if I'm a network analyst and I pick a threshold, right, I pick something on the x-axis, the t, we could get 2 different interpretations of degree assortativity, because degree assortativity above 0 means that, like a positive degree assortativity means that degrees of, or nodes of higher degree, so nodes that are more connected, typically tend to connect with other highly connected nodes. Negative means vice versa. And so here we can say that if we pick a certain t, something like 4.3 maybe, we have positive degree assortativity without transitive closure and negative degree assortativity with transitive closure. Okay. Another question I got from one of my study teams, this is again the study of young men who have sex with men in Chicago, is what if we only have partial ground truth status? Like what if instead of going through every single potential pair, which is highly, like that was really lucky that I got a data set where they had done that, we only do that for a sample of nodes in the network? Could we use things like precision and recall to extrapolate from just a sample how well our entity resolution algorithms performing? And this is maybe, so again, supervised evaluation, I talked about that. In entity resolution, you can't use accuracy, it's unbalanced. There are way more negatives, there aren't that many duplicates compared to the entire size of the data set. So precision, recall, F-score, F-measure are typically better tools. And basically what I did is I looked back in my sampling theory and used ratio estimation to adjust precision and recall for sampling bias, where, these are formulas that were derived that I can go back to. And I want to show you why this is an important thing to do, right? So we can think about a data set with 10,000 records in R. The known match status is there. It's about a 10% duplication rate. Let's say we just run like not a great entity resolution algorithm. Like let's just match on like first name and nothing else. And we like based on just a 10%, we take a 10% random sample of our data. We then map the records back to our ground truth and compute precision and recall from the sample. And this is done all the time in the network domain. And so we can see that, I mean, again, the entity resolution algorithm didn't perform that well. The precision was 0.5, but when we do this naive approach to estimate this, we get we way overestimate how well our entity resolution algorithm is performing. And with my proposed estimate, we get a lot closer to how it's actually working on the data set. And so I did this with radar. Okay, real quick, diagnostics for sensitivity. If you don't have any ground truth matching status, looking at like local network metrics. So instead of these one numbers to summarize the whole thing, let's look at local metrics where we have one number per every node, pretty much for something like degree of centrality. And then I basically devised a tool where we could assess sensitivity just looking at network structure to a range of parameter selections. Here you have radar, a much larger network, and we're seeing that betweenness and degree centrality aren't changing that much between different T's. And so maybe our parameters selection isn't as important here, but we saw a completely different picture with the other data set. Again, this is, what I want you to take away, important for egocentric network analysis, and we can adjust it with limited information. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby. We could take maybe one or two quick questions for Abby.
Yeah. Like you're saying take our data and try to extrapolate it to what like not just the observed social network community would be, but the underlying like true big picture. That is something that is being researched with things like link prediction. I've seen that a lot. Not something I work on, but and honestly, like I think it's for this data is highly ambiguous and messy at times. So I think it would be hard to do something like that. But yeah, that'd be interesting.
Thank you, Abby. Sorry,
Thank
we
you.
don't have a lot more.
Sorry.
Any questions offline? Thank you so much. Next, we'll have Emma Zajdela. She's in the Department of Engineering Science and Applied Math. Her advisor is Danny Abrams, and her talk will be about modeling cyclical dynamics of fashion trends. Her research interests more broadly are on mathematical modeling of complex social systems. And two also very interesting fun facts: she's obsessed with hexagons, and her dream is to write a book. Thank you so much, Emma.
A book about hexagons. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today at NICO. It's been a really special place during my time at Northwestern. And the last lightning talk I gave was on Zoom, so it's great to be here in person. I'm going to talk about some recent work on back in fashion, modeling the cyclical dynamics of trends. And I'd like to start with a little bit of a quiz, then versus now. And I'm actually going to launch this for the folks on Zoom as well. All right, so raise your hand if you think image A, oops, is this going up there? Okay. Raise your hand if you think image A is then. Is then. Yeah, rather than now. 1, 2. Okay, raise your hand if you think image B is then. So like 50-50, I would say. And let's see our results on Zoom. So 60% of people think that B was then. And let me give you the answer. Oops. Okay. Yeah, so those of you who raised your hand for A were right. This one on the left is 1969, actress Ally McGraw, and addressed by designer Ossie Clark. And the other one was 2015, Saint Laurent Spring Summer 2015. Okay, one more quiz for fun. Let me launch it also on Zoom. Okay, raise your hand if you think A is then. Raise your hand if you think B is then. Overwhelming majority for B. That's the same on Zoom. Okay, interesting. You guys are right. So the one on B was 2001 Prada, and A was 2020 Jacquemus. Now, I think this little quiz that I did just highlights this experience that a lot of us have had, that we feel like trends come back. We've all seen, especially recently, bell-bottom jeans come back, the mini skirt is back, the width of the tie is skinny as it comes back and goes out of fashion. But the question is, with all of these things coming back, what is back? I just want to show you the results of a Google search I did yesterday, which is that according to Cosmo, 38 unforgettable 2000s fashion trends are back, but also 90s grunge is back, and the 80s are back, and the 70s are back in fashion again. 60s fashion trends that are making a comeback. Tired of Y2K, these 50s fashion trends are back. And the 40s are back in 2021. So if everything is back, is anything really back? Now, I think what's really interesting with this is that today we have this unprecedented ability to actually go out and answer this question because of the data that's available to us. And fashion is such an interesting place to do this because you have this kind of constrained environment of the garment that you need to wear that can only evolve to a certain extent. And there's many types of trends that evolve over time. Recently, Josh Plotkin came to NICO and he talked about dog breeds and baby names. But our goal here is to study the origin and spread of human innovation in this constrained environment of fashion. And beyond just this curiosity of thinking about the idea of trends coming back, fashion actually represents a $2.5 trillion global industry. And a lot of these big fashion houses have in-house analysts. So if we can predict these trends more accurately, could be worth a lot of money. And not only that, the fashion industry we know pollutes a lot. So 10% of global carbon dioxide output just on fashion. And that's more than international flights and shipping combined. So if we can predict fashion trends more accurately, perhaps we can cut down on some of the waste that's going on with fashion that's being produced and not being consumed. So our specific objective here was to construct first a database of quantitative measures of fashion over 150 years. Next, we want to test whether fashion is really cyclical or if just everything is back all the time. And if yes, try to determine what the length of the cycle of that could be. And finally, we want to have a mathematical model that can predict the origins of these oscillations and perhaps even predict future trends. So we have some really amazing data sources. We are working from images. What you're seeing here is images from the COPA database or the Commercial Pattern Archives. And they basically have a bunch of images from 1869 to 2015 of patterns. So people who went and then produced the clothing. There's images, information about the brand, price data. They have men's and women's clothing. We, for this study, are restricting to women's dresses. And we have 25,000 images that are fully processed at this point. We also have the Vogue runway database. So it's a little bit different because when you're having a pattern archive, this is more what people would actually wear in daily life versus a runway can be more of an artistic expression of fashion. But we have almost 1 million images from 1988 to 2023. And then we have another source called the Fashion Anthology, similar to the Vogue runway archives with some more images. Now, a big question here is, how do we quantify fashion? And we have to make some choices because there's a lot of different things we could look at. We could look at the fabric, we could look at the color of the garment. But what we chose to do for various reasons is to look at the measures of the garment. So we had a great student, Emily Kohlberg, who worked with us for a summer to develop this tool that you go through the garments and then you click on certain high points of the dresses. So we have the eye of the model and the feet. That gives us an idea of the height of the model to scale everything else. Then we have the neckline, so how low cut this is, the waistline, which we know evolves a lot, and then the hemline. And Alicia Katica, who's my co-advisor on this project from art history, also helped us develop how exactly we should consider these points and select them. And I have to give credit also to Jeremy, who is a clicking machine and did like the 25,000 points pretty much by himself on the COPA database this past summer. So I'm going to be focusing just to give you a brief idea on the hemline. This is our data from the COPA database. So the average hemline over time. You can see that the feet here are at -1. So a lower point means a lower hemline closer to the ground. You might be wondering why some are under -1. I don't know if that's why you have your hand raised. Okay. So this is the hemline at the bottom of the dress. Yeah. So if it's under the feet, sometimes these old dresses had like these long trains, so that goes under -1. You can see that there's this general trend of hemlines increasing over time, but there also seems to be some of these cyclical aspects that we might expect. So then we took out this trend, this upward trend over time, and looked at how this hemline evolved. And you can see that it's not necessarily perfect cycles, but you can see that there are these cycles that are appearing over time. And perhaps also, this is a different question I'm not going to get into, but perhaps speeding up in recent years. Now below here, what we did is a Fourier series analysis. So we're trying to look at what the dominant frequency is for these cycles. And the interesting thing here I want you to keep in mind is that the biggest peak was at 0.005 cycles per year, which is meaning that there's a cycle every 20 years. And this is really interesting because I didn't know this until recently, but apparently this is something that a lot of people claim, that there's the 20-year rule in fashion, that fashion comes back every 20 years. People talk about this, that there's this different rise and decline in fashion. So it's actually very interesting that so far our data is supporting that. But if we want to model the origin of these fashion trends, how do we do it? There could be extrinsic factors that are driving it, perhaps the economy or celebrities, specific people. I have this image here that shows a little bit of these cycles and gives all these different explanations. For example, Audrey Hepburn puts kitten heels on the fashion map, but then it's all about stilettos and Manolo Blahnik resurrects them. So maybe it's celebrities, maybe it's designers, maybe it's economic factors. There's this kind of idea that economists sometimes say that hemline is related to the economy. And it could also be intrinsic factors. So there's this quote that I love by designer Agnes B, which says the problem with fashion is that it goes out of fashion. So when you have something that becomes fashionable, you want to differentiate yourself from other trends. So you need to become different. And that might be an intrinsic factor that would lead things to become cyclical. So we have a couple different candidate mechanisms, which I'm not going to go through too much for time. But one of our ideas is this delay differential equation model. And what that means is we're thinking that the hemline might be, you want to be slightly different than what was going on last year, but maybe you're attracted to this 20-year period. So this is the idea of it. And this would produce cyclical dynamics like this. We also considered something like a leader-follower model. So perhaps there's the high fashion brands or specific designers that lead the trends, and everyone else wants to follow. So on the top here, these are the equations for the dynamics of the leaders and the followers. So our idea was that the leaders would be repulsed from the followers. They don't want to be like the people who are not fashionable. But then the followers are attracted to what the leaders are doing with a certain time delay for them to actually catch up to what the leaders are doing. And this would similarly produce this type of dynamic, which I see the labels are switched on leader and follower. So we actually looked at our data a little bit to see, do we see any of these dynamics? Here we have the price of Vogue patterns compared to the price of all of the other patterns. And this is adjusted for inflation. And so you can see Vogue in blue. So the price was generally greater. And so we thought, okay, maybe because it's more expensive, it's more valuable, Vogue would be a leader. And this is what the two different hemlines look like. And what we found, we looked at these cross correlation, is that maybe Vogue is a year ahead of the other brands, but there was not super strong evidence for this. This may be a limitation of using patterns because by the time they've come to the market, maybe everybody had time to catch up. So some external factors, we looked at the unemployment rate compared to the hemline. You can see that sort of the cases, it does look like hemline and unemployment are inversely correlated, but to be determined how accurate this is. So just some conclusions, and I'll be interested to talk to you about your ideas on this. We did find that hemlines display cyclical behavior, and actually not only that, we find evidence to support this idea that fashion trends come back every 20 years. And there may be some leader-follower dynamics, but for now, the data that we have with the COPA and the patterns does not strongly support that. And finally, there may be some external factors at play, but those probably don't fully explain the behavior that we're observing. So some next steps, we're looking to expand our data set from just the COPA to the Vogue runway and fashion anthology. And that might require some different types of tools. I don't think Jeremy can manually click through 1 million records of a Vogue runway, although I wish I could clone him so he could. And then also determining the role of seasonality. Obviously, you're going to wear different types of clothing. Maybe the dresses will be different depending on the season. And finally, just determining the best model based on the ones that we've proposed that actually fit the data. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. We'll take some questions now.
That was really cool. Thank you. So you looked at hemline. Did you look at the other metrics, and did you also look at them compared to each other and see if there were any defining?
Yeah, we did look at the other metrics. I showed you the hemline because it's one that was the clearest. For neckline especially, we did find kind of similar behavior as hemline. Waistline was interesting. You have, I don't know if you can visualize it, but in the 1920s, you have this very kind of significant drop waist that you don't really see repeated any other time. And one thing that we've thought of doing is looking at how these go together. So at some point, we tried a measure of exposed skin, we call it. And so we thought maybe there was something about how morality in society, or society was viewing women, would be correlated with how short the dresses were and how low the necklines were. But that pretty much behaves similarly also to the hemline.
Thank you.
I seem to recall a study, with like Levi Jeans and others. It's a business case of where, they had to become more innovative and hip to the younger generation, and then it kind of diffuses from there to the rest of the population. Not sure what that looks like in this, but is there any way to tell like how the age affects these sort of cyclical trends? I mean, we're always having these young people that are up and coming, and they probably don't want to be like their parents, or maybe even the kids that were 10 years, older than them. They want to be their own person, and that results in these cyclical trends. I don't know. I'm just
Yeah, I mean, that's something we've discussed for sure, especially about that 20-year number. I don't know exactly how we would test for that, but I think there is this idea that maybe you don't want to be like your parents because your parents are not fashionable, but maybe you're okay with when does something become retro, essentially? When is retro cool? Maybe it's this 20-year cycle. And it might have something to do also with how trends might be accelerating to some extent. I also didn't show you this plot, but the standard deviation of trends is changing. So more recently, perhaps there's just more widespread trends versus conformity that was in the past. So another interesting thing to look at.
Just a little suggestion for the analysis of the data. So you did the power spectrum, but maybe if you do wavelet analysis, you can look at changes in how the frequency modes change over time.
Yeah.
And it generates very pretty pictures too.
Great. Yeah, I'll look at that.
Really interesting study, I think, because also there's like issues of sustainability with fashion now, and so seeing these like driving factors would be really important. One maybe possible suggestion could help you with data is maybe there's data on what people are buying. I would assume that would be more like maybe 50s onwards or 60 onwards, but that could also, because I think
Where, what data is it publicly available?
I have no clue.
Yeah, I mean, so when we set out to do this study, we were trying to figure out what data should we use and how can we get our hands on data, because I mean, the fashion houses, they have all of these measurements that we're clicking through, they have them. And I have a friend in the fashion industry in France, and she told me basically each garment has this technical card that has all these measurements on it. And sometimes brands will actually take out a card from 10 or 20 years ago and use it almost exactly as the basis for its the new garment. But the issue is as far as I know, the fashion brands are not particularly interested in sharing that data with us. But if anybody has a connection, please, I'm very interested.
Thank you. So in that context of sustainability, how much energy would be consumed versus CO2 produced if you were to store garments for 20 years versus thrashing them and reproducing them?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know to what extent this is happening, but I feel like there is a rise in vintage stores or thrift stores. So I think this is actually something that's being done to some extent, but maybe if you had better models, you could sort of curate how these vintage stores are going to sell, how they should store. So yeah, great point.
Thank you for the presentation, Emma, really nice. My question is that I think we are in a time where fast fashion industry is playing like a bigger role in some of these trends, and I see that you're mentioning that the trends are changing much more quickly these days. I wonder if there is some relation how these fast fashion companies like Zara, H&M, etc., may be driving some of
100%. I think there's a couple things at play. Our analysis right now is stopping in 2015, and beyond the fact that that's just the data we have, I think part of the reason for that is that not just fast fashion brands, but also social media are really driving how quickly these trends are changing. But in one of the models I showed, so the leader follower model, the followers have some time lag with when they can produce something comparable to what the leaders produce. And you're absolutely right that those times are decreasing dramatically. I mean, even a week sometimes after a fashion show comes out, these fast fashion companies will have produced the garment. So I absolutely think that there's something there.
Just a small thing. I was just curious if you have any insights on the men's fashion as well.
I don't currently, but it's something we also talked about. I mentioned the width of ties. We were trying to think about things that could be quantified in fashion. You know, the width of men's ties is definitely one. So maybe future study to come. Or men's facial hair was one we also mentioned. You know, trends in beards. Beards have been kind of popular the past few years, but at some point they were out of fashion.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers, and thanks everyone for attending.